Hello, I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. Today's guest, Peter Schiff. He is the CEO of Euro Pacific Precious Metals. He also wrote a book recently called The Real Crash. Peter Schiff, thank you for joining us today.
Sure. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, you called the 2008 meltdown. You wrote a book called The Real Crash That's Coming. And, just last week we had this, QE to infinity. Is this going to help, prolong the crash, or is it going to bring the crash closer to us, make it come faster?
No, it does postpone it. If the Fed hadn't done this latest round of QE, then we might have had the collapse sooner, and it would have been better. The sooner we get it out of the way, the better, because the longer we wait, the worse it's going to be, because we simply compound the mistakes that make the crash necessary. When I wrote my original book that predicted the economic collapse back in '07, the one that I was referring to is not what happened in 2008. Even though I did predict that in the book as well, I predicted that decline as being the catalyst that would drive to the ultimate collapse, because I knew that the government would make the mistake of artificially stimulating the economy and bailing out the industries that were going to collapse, namely the banks and housing. And I knew that it was the government cure that was going to ultimately kill us, not the disease that, of course, we got as a result of government policy as well. So I was long expecting this QE3 announcement. In fact, when QE2 was first announced, I was on television predicting that there would be a QE3, because I knew that not only would QE2 not work, but it would exacerbate the very problems that it was aimed to cure. And so I knew that it would sow the seed of QE3. And of course, we got that in spades last week with the Fed's announcement, which I described as maybe the final nail in the dollar's coffin, and the U.S. economy for that matter, because I think that the stage has been set for a currency crisis and a sovereign debt crisis, and they're going to come, and they're going to come relatively soon, and it's going to be horrific.
You say this is going to end in pain and misery, and I'm sure you're talking for the common man. What does it look like at street level when you're talking about pain and misery? Gasoline at what? Bread at what?
Prices are going to go up. I mean, the Federal Reserve thinks that they're going to create purchasing power by creating money. They're not. They're going to destroy the purchasing power of money by creating inflation. And so maybe stock prices will go up. Maybe real estate prices will go up, but not as much as food prices, not as much as gas prices. And of course, a lot of Americans don't own their house. They rent. They don't have any money in the stock market, but they buy food, they buy energy, and they're not going to buy nearly as much of it as a result of what the Fed is doing. And of course, not only are people going to continue to lose their jobs with this policy, but even the Americans who manage to maintain their jobs, they're not going to maintain their living standard, because the paychecks are not going to keep pace with the escalating cost of living thanks to the Fed.
Well, you of course run Euro Pacific Precious Metals. Where do you think the gold price is going to go now, and what's the time window you're telling clients where gold's going to go?
It's going up. I mean, I've been anticipating this event and telling my clients, advising my clients to buy in advance of it. And of course, prices are now higher as a result of the announcement, but I wouldn't wait for a pullback. I mean, I would advise people, if they don't already own precious metals, to buy it right now. If they own some gold and silver, but not enough, buy more before the prices go any higher. I think there is much more upside potential in the market than downside risk. I think the Fed certainly has put a floor under the market. And I think the dollar is vulnerable to a massive collapse. And so you don't want to be caught holding dollars when the music stops. You want to get out now, buy gold or silver. Just don't fall into the pitfalls. Don't let some fast-talking salesman talk you into some numismatic or some proof or some rare coins. In fact, I've got a website that I set up. People can go to and download my free report. It's goldscams.com. So before you buy any gold from anybody, go to that website, goldscams.com, download my free report, and then you'll know what to look out for. Of course, if you go to my company, Euro Pacific Precious Metals, you can just go to schiffgold.com. We're going to make sure to put you into the right kind of gold and silver, bullion, coins, and bars, none of the gimmicks, none of these high markups. A lot of these big firms, you buy gold and silver, you need a 70% move or 100% move just to break even. You don't want that. You want a small markup, or just a small increase in the price of gold is all you need to be profitable.
Well, you're sort of to me, you're kind of a rising star in the Republican Party. You made a run for the Senate in your state. You had a very good showing. You were at the GOP convention. You're more like Ron Paul than Mitt Romney. I'm not saying anything bad about Mitt Romney, but
Hardly
what
rise
happened?
star of the party. I mean, I came in third in a three-way race. I got 23% when I ran in Connecticut, and I was at the convention, but I was there on a press pass. You know, I wasn't there as a delegate or anything. So I was there, and I was at the Democratic convention too. I'm obviously not a rising star there.
Well,
I'm certainly don't have the influence of Ron Paul, but I'm very sympathetic to the things that Ron Paul believes in. I've been a supporter of Ron Paul since he was a Texas congressman in the 1980s. I voted for him in 1988 when he ran for president on a libertarian ticket. So, and a lot of people that support Ron Paul, a number of them did so because of me. I know I turned a lot of people on to Ron Paul and vice versa. I know a lot of Ron Paul supporters have ended up finding out about me because they first found out about Ron Paul. So we have that in common. But he certainly is a much bigger factor, and certainly his son Rand now being a senator. I lost my bid for the U.S. Senate, but Rand won. So he's more of a rising star than I am. But hopefully I can have some influence on that party. And I do have some friends now in the Republican Party, in the House and in the Senate. And hopefully, I have some influence over them in that they read my stuff, they listen to my video blogs, and they're sympathetic to my point of view.
Well, what are they telling you when you say, hey, we're going about this the wrong way? We need to raise interest rates. We need to stop the money printing. We need to do the opposite of what Ben Bernanke's doing.
Well, they agree.
What do your Republican friends say?
They agree. But, the problem is, even when I talk to people in Congress, Republicans that I run into at some of these functions, privately, they will agree with me. The problem is always the politics. The problem is getting them to do the right thing when they know the political backlash will be enormous. Nobody wants to be the bearer of bad news, right? Nobody, wants to be the messenger who gets shot because of the message. Everybody wants to pretend that all the government promises can be kept. Even the Republicans, most of them don't want to tell people that are expecting Social Security and Medicare that they're not going to get what they were promised. Nobody wants to do that. And even the Republicans don't want to cut national defense. So it's very difficult, even for the people who, maybe are sympathetic and understand what I'm saying, to actually get them to do it and to believe that there's a reason to do it. Because how are they going to convince other senators or congressmen to follow them? I mean, they don't want to sign on to a losing cause. They don't want to be, volunteer for the Alamo, knowing that they're going to get gunned down. Why go out on a limb if they know there's not going to be enough people joining them to actually make a difference? All they do is end up committing political suicide because they can't find enough people to take a stand with them, and so they are afraid of losing.
And to your point, then, we still are going to get the real crash. Even if they ignore it and they don't want to lose, aren't we? We're going to get it.
When the Fed finally has to choose between runaway inflation and a collapse because they have to raise interest rates to stop runaway inflation or hyperinflation. So we're going to get to that tipping point at some time where the Fed is damned if it does and damned if it doesn't. And no matter what it chooses, it's going to bring on a crisis. Except if it chooses inflation, it brings on an even bigger crisis, but it might postpone it for a few months. But that's it, right? So we're going to have the real crisis one way or another. Just prepare for it. And I think either way, I think owning gold and silver makes a lot of sense. I think gold and silver will do well under either scenario. Although if we end up with hyperinflation instead of a collapse or a deflationary collapse, then I think that's when gold and silver will shine their brightest.
Last question. What's your time horizon on this real crash? 2 months, 2 years?
It could happen in 2 months. More likely it won't happen that soon, although it could. But I do believe it will happen during the term of whoever is elected president, whether it's a second or Obama term or a first Romney term. I think it will happen sooner the better, again, as far as I'm concerned, because the longer we wait, the worse it's going to be because the bigger the problems build up. Of course, it's hard to put an exact time frame on it, and you never know what might happen to delay it. I've overestimated the intelligence of the world many times when it comes to loaning us money and buying our bonds. So I'm not going to try to do it now. And of course, you never know what circumstances might intervene. For example, the recent European crisis, I think, bought us some time because it took the focus off of the U.S. problem and put it on the European problem. So people were more afraid of the euro than they were the dollar. I think the fears over the euro are ebbing. People no longer are thinking that the euro's collapse or imminent or disintegration of the currency. So I think that's putting the spotlight back on the U.S. But you never know. Maybe something will happen in Japan. Maybe something will happen in China that will, extend the window a little bit longer once again. But I really would think it would be amazing to me if we can go another 3 or 4 years and the crisis hasn't happened. So the next year or two, I think, is a high probability of some kind of crisis. It's exactly how to handicap it, I don't know. But I think it's more likely than not that we have a crisis in the next 2 years than we have in 5 years from now. But you just have to be prepared in advance because you don't know exactly when it's going to start. Just pretend like it's tomorrow and make sure you got your ducks in a row.
It's kind of sad. I just want to close with this thought. Kind of sad. The politicians know we're headed for a crash. They're not stupid, but they don't want to get blamed for trying to stop it ahead of time.
Don't overestimate some of them. A lot of them don't know. They are that stupid. But you're right. There are some who know. And either they don't care or they care, but they don't think they can do anything about it. So they just go along. But they know privately that it's going to collapse. They just might not know exactly how soon. I don't think there's that many people who believe it's as imminent as I do. They think it's going to happen, but it might be a 10-year or 20-year problem. I just don't think we have that big a window of opportunity, or I don't know if I'd use the word opportunity, but I think the crisis is coming a lot sooner than that.
Peter Schiff, CEO of Euro Pacific Precious Metals, thank you for being on USAWatchdog.com.
Sure. Thanks for having me on.